What's up, guys? How's everyone doing? First off, I know this is a lore video, but where is the voice changer? Sadly, I will be doing away with the voice changer in my lore videos from now on. I had fun doing it, and I enjoyed, approaching these things from an in-universe, in-character perspective, but it adds an extra layer of work to these videos that greatly slows the rate that I can produce them at. So, as my life gets crazier with the Praxeum coming up, I had to make a choice, and I've chosen to do more traditional lore videos with my normal voice and an out-of-universe perspective in order to help me get more of these things done. If you guys really loved the in-character perspective that much, then leave a comment down below and I can always switch back. But, with that said, in our last video, we discussed the Ruusan era and the build-up towards the Clone Wars. We talked about the flashpoint on Naboo breaking into open conflict with the Trade Federation, the Stark Hyperspace War before that, and we ended with Anakin being found and accepted by the Jedi Order for training under the newly minted Jedi Knight, Obi-Wan Kenobi. But all was not well in the galaxy. The defeat of the Trade Federation proved to be more of a setback than anything else, with the leadership of the massive intergalactic company shifting to Newt Gunray. Things in the galaxy had been following a path of corruption for a very long time, as we talked about in our last video, with corporations slowly whittling away the sovereignty of governments, abusing the environment, indigenous populations, and more. The Trade Federation even managed to secure its own seat in the Galactic Senate, a private company with the same power of representation previously reserved for individual citizens. None of this endeared the Republic to the galaxy at large, and the cracks that had begun to form in the old status quo widened. Exactly as Darth Sidious wanted them to. The Sith Lord used the Republic's bureaucracy as a weapon, and he utilized his position as Supreme Chancellor to allow things to get worse and worse, vetoing a bill here, fighting for the wrong cause there. Meanwhile, the creation of the clone army was well underway. It's really important to understand that the clone army was a secret to the Republic at large. The Ruusan reformations were still very much in effect, and the idea of a large, centralized army was still something much of the galaxy would have been horrified by. So, how did the Grand Army even come to be? Well, for that we have to go backwards a bit, back to our last video. We discussed Darth Plagueis in that video, and how he and Sidious had been working for years towards the Sith's grand plan. Say that 10 times fast. Anyway, a human Jedi Master, known as Sifo Dyas, was extremely gifted in foresight, and he was haunted by visions of an existential crisis plaguing the Republic, a looming threat that would bring an end to the ancient galactic government. Plagueis and Sidious manipulated these fears, with Plagueis introducing himself to Dyas as a concerned businessman who was worried about the future state of the galaxy. Together, they contracted the Kaminoans to produce the clone army, Sifo Dyas acting as the frontman, while Plagueis provided the funding. Sidious worked to arm this grand army at the same time, using his office as Supreme Chancellor and layers created by dozens of shell companies to contract with Kuat drive yards. KDY created what is known as the Rathana subdivision, with Rathana Heavy Engineering developing and producing the military equipment so famous to the clone army. Their distinctive armor, their ships, their tanks, and the famous LAAT. The donor for the genetic template to the clone army was Jango Fett, and he happened to be a Mandalorian. He brought with him 75 of his most trusted associates, and it was their job to oversee the training of the clone army. This group of Mandalorians became known as the Kui Val Dar. I know I said that wrong. Mandalore is probably going to be so mad at me. But they instilled aspects of Mandalorian culture and training into the Grand Army of the Republic. This meant that the Republic at large had a huge, well-trained, well-equipped military by the time 22 ABY came around. And yet, almost nobody in the entire galaxy knew about it. Eventually, Obi-Wan Kenobi would discover Kamino. And I feel like I don't need to go over those events here. Everybody that's watching this video has probably seen Attack of the Clones, and if you haven't, then you should definitely go watch it. But, to make a long story short, the events of that movie culminated in the clone army being deployed to Geonosis to rescue several dozen Jedi. And this resulted in an enormous battle on the planet. The battle was a very decisive victory for the Republic. The Grand Army was able to catch the Separatist forces off guard. But, despite this, many of the upper echelons of their command structure were able to escape the planet. And this kicked off one of the greatest conflicts in galactic history. Sidious was rubbing his hands together in glee. So, before we get too deep into the war itself, I wanted to talk to you guys about the two armies that were involved. On one side, you had the Galactic Republic, and on the other, you had a coalition of rebels known as the Confederacy of Independent Systems, or the CIS. The CIS was made up of thousands of systems. Some of them had very legitimate grievances against the Republic, grievances that Darth Sidious had only stoked. It was led, however, mostly by private corporate interests, such as the Intergalactic Banking Clan and the Trade Federation. The vast wealth that these companies had accrued over the past decades allowed them to finance the creation of enormous droid armies. I'm talking trillions of battle droids produced over the course of only a few years. The CIS outnumbered the Grand Army of the Republic throughout the war, outnumbered them by far. In some cases, they almost outgunned the Republic as well, with carefully controlled intelligence leaks the only thing that really kept the playing field level. For example, there was the creation of the B-3 battle droid, which was an enormous, Cortosis-made, Jedi-killing fiend of a droid that only failed to enter mass production thanks to the intervention of a Jedi strike team that only figured out about the program's existence thanks to Palpatine leaking the plans to the Republic. On the opposite side of the line, we had the Grand Army of the Republic, which was fighting for the age-old galactic government. Now, in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, it is mentioned that 1 million clones stand ready and 1 million more are on their way. The Essential Guide to Warfare tells us that the clone army numbered over 3 million by the end of the war. Now, this still seems surprisingly low, especially since the same Guide to Warfare tells us that there were hundreds of billions, if not trillions, of droids fighting for the Confederacy of Independent Systems. How could the Galactic Republic fight a war against such a lopsided enemy? Well, the answer is that the clones didn't fight alone. The Ruusan Reformations, as we discussed in my last video, had divided the galaxy up into sectors, and this resulted in the creation of the Judicial Forces. The Judicial Forces were mostly locally maintained. They were the defense forces from individual star systems. Some of these sector forces had actually been developed into quite powerful militaries towards the end of the Ruusan era, with, for example, the Tarkans in the Ariadu sector taking a very particularly militaristic stance, building lots of very large warships and preparing for this exact situation. Long story short, the sector forces took on the bulk of the fighting during the Clone Wars. The Grand Army was used to launch offensives or reinforce areas of particular strategic importance. The Republic had access to several 100 billion troops when the sector forces and the Grand Army were taken into account together, and oftentimes there were as few as 150,000 clones deployed into a theater of operations. So, the organization of the two armies is something that you should now see on your screen. The GAR was built using the idea of small unit tactics, which is a real-life military doctrine that we use to construct our military organizations in real life. This doctrine calls for warfighting to take place on the small, individual level, with individual fire teams or squads doing most of the work. Team leaders and squad leaders, because of the small nature of this organization, are the ones that are mostly making decisions when combat is actually ongoing. So, you construct the military from the ground up, starting with the squad. A platoon consists of a few squads, a company consists of a few platoons, etc., building on up from there. The Jedi were integrated into this command structure, and they were given command of the larger units from corps size all the way up through system army. Some of these generals were children as young as 12. Tens of thousands of clones put at the beck and call of a child. As stated before, the clones had a very strict martial culture that was dominated by Mandalorian beliefs, and putting them under the command of an inexperienced child left them feeling a little bit frustrated. And this was purposeful on the part of Palpatine, one of many small manipulations that he set into motion in order to sow resentment beneath the surface to ensure that Order 66 would be followed through. Now, the clones had a color scheme for their ranks, much like the Mandalorian Neo Crusaders had centuries before. At the very bottom were the non-commissioned officers who wore green. Above them were the field officers who wore blue. Above them were the company officers who wore red. And then above them were the commanders who were wearing yellow. The Separatist military was a little bit more informal, with rank and structure often decided based on the local forces that were actually in command of the droid armies. They did have generals and admirals and stuff like that, but they were more figures that had that rank previous to their commitment to the CIS. Now, they did get reorganized under General Grievous, but it was divided up mostly based on the way that units could be transported. So, for example, a company of droids could fit on an MTT, while an army could fit on a Lucrehulk. It kind of puts into perspective how many droids we're talking about when you see those floating donuts on screen, right? Anyway, the war started slow, with both sides trying to rapidly build up and organize their forces. The Separatists pursued an asymmetric strategy of terror and confusion, trying to launch random, rapid strikes at key areas across the galaxy, disrupting hyperlanes, seizing what industrial areas they could, basically trying to make life as hard as possible for the Republic. In this map on screen now, you can see the areas where they managed to truly dig in, the red areas. The Hutt cartel took advantage of the chaos and expanded. They are the yellow area, and the rest is obviously the Republic control. This is not to say that the beginning of the war did not see major action. There were major offensives on both sides during the first year, though each side had very clear and different objectives for themselves. On the Republic's part, they moved to break the CIS as quickly as possible. The 11th Army, under Master Aayla Secura, clashed with Separatists on the world of Falorum, while the 9th Army pushed towards Agamar and Munilist, hoping to cut off that entire sector from the Outer Hydian, one of the most important trade routes in the galaxy. Munilist was a very heavy economic world and the Munes backed the currency of both the CIS and the Republic. So when Separatists started setting up droid factories on the planet, it needed to be retaken in order to secure the Republic's economy. Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi took part in this campaign, and the Republic did retake Mutalist after heavy and bloody fighting. The 12th Army embarked on their own offensive at the same time, advancing up the Paralimian Way from Lantilles to Centaures, and their objective was to secure the Maldruge sector, which was a very important stretch of hyperlanes that, if they lost control of, could open up the core to invasion. The Separatists, in the meanwhile, they had their own pushes, but again, they were following a stateless strategy for their military as much as possible. They didn't really move to secure more traditional military objectives, but instead focused on asymmetrical aspects of the conflict, like certain weapons that could tilt the balance. Count Dooku, who was the public leader of the CIS and the Sith apprentice to Darth Sidious, launched a campaign to find an ancient superweapon known as the Dark Reaper, and this was a Sith weapon that could absorb the life force of things around it. He was eventually stopped by Anakin Skywalker, but not before leading the CIS on a random and rampaging offensive that led them from Renvar to Raxus Prime. General Severance Tan led a similar offensive around the same time, but in a bit of a different part of the galaxy, in the Outer Rim. Tan was Chiss, and thus extremely intelligent and a very capable general. She launched a series of attacks across the Outer Rim just after the First Battle of Geonosis, attempting to keep the Republic off guard and prevent them from consolidating and launching counterattacks. She was initially so successful that she managed to seize a secret Republic superweapon called the Decimator. Now, the Decimator wasn't the type of superweapon that you normally would think of. It wasn't like a huge Death Star or anything like that. It was actually the plans to an incredibly powerful mobile battle platform that could engage and defeat almost any conventional ground force. It gave the CIS a very distinct edge early in the war. Tan was eventually defeated by Jedi Master Ichu Shenjan, which brought an end to her campaign, but despite this, her actions would have a very large effect on the war, and she would give the CIS time to entrench throughout much of the Outer Rim. Meanwhile, the CIS managed to repulse the Republic at the Battle of Hypori. Hypori was a major droid production base, and the GIR launched a lightning strike in order to eliminate these facilities. However, it was a trap. General Grievous was there, and he left Hypori vulnerable specifically to lure the Republic into battle, where he revealed himself. Orbital mines hit the Republic fleet almost as soon as they dropped out of hyperspace, and the ground forces that they did manage to land were completely overrun. The Republic forces there were annihilated, and a Jedi strike team consisting of several masters was routed. This was the first of many moves that the cyborg general would make against his hated enemy, the Jedi. There were several other notable battles during this part of the war, but they weren't necessarily part of a larger campaign, or they were parts of things that were already discussed. The Battle of Dantooine took part, for example, in conjunction with the push towards Mutalist. The Battle of Dock took place as the Republic sent forces to help defend the Mon Calamari homeworld. The Separatists made a daring attack against Camino that was repulsed, but which forced the Galactic Republic to maintain a garrison on their cloning world for the rest of the war. There was a major battle at Ryloth as the Techno Union launched an offensive of their own. And we don't have time to cover the individual conflicts in this video. If I did, the video would end up being like 9 hours long. We can look at the Clone Wars in a more detailed manner in a longer video later, or I could do individual battle videos if you wanted. Leave a comment down below and let me know. But anyway, the first year of the war was characterized by 2 major Republic offenses in the northern part of the galaxy and major Confederate offensives that were largely repulsed in the south. Battle lines were drawn, and the war progressed into its second year, stretching from 21 to 20 BBY. The second year was not good for the Republic, and the CIS took the momentum. The Separatists struck along key trade routes, looking to disrupt the gains that the Republic had made the year before. They pushed hard at Brental 4, which sat at a key hyperspace juncture between the Hydian and the Perlemian. The CIS was ultimately repulsed by Jedi Master Plo Koon, but the fighting was extremely bloody, and it tied up a very large portion of Republic forces. Asymmetric fighting with the Separatists began to take a toll, and the Grand Army of the Republic was forced to respond to multiple crisis points across the galaxy simultaneously. Count Dooku led a lightning strike against the Jedi Archives on Coruscant in a raid that terrified the city and led to a permanent military presence being stationed on the capital. Heavy fighting continued on Nadium and Orb Mantell, and the 12th Army's push of the Hydian stalled at the world of Jabeem. The Republic had secured a large part of the Maldruid sector, but their work was beginning to come undone as their push was held up at that world. A strike force under Jedi Master Kia-D Mundi was sent to Argonar to try to relieve the deadlock at Jabeem, but they met with absolute defeat, finding themselves outnumbered, overwhelmed, and repulsed. This turned the Battle of Jabeem into a slog, and the Republic found themselves overextended and vulnerable. The CIS struck back, with the Dark Jedi Asajj Ventress taking command of Confederate forces. The fighting was brutal, and the Republic barely managed to stave off total annihilation by staging a heroic last stand that tied up the enemy force and allowed the bulk of their very battered and bruised troops to retreat. The 12th Army was broken, and their successful offensive was completely undone. They were forced to fall back down the Hydian, which left nothing between the Separatist army and the core worlds. The 501st was deployed to Coruscant as a response, and the Republic girded itself for a very dark counteroffensive. Meanwhile, the Mandalorians had remained neutral throughout the conflict, and they in fact led a coalition of neutral worlds that tried to stay out of the war. Despite this, the fanatic organization known as Death Watch, a group of Mandalorian militant extremists, began to help the CIS against the Republic. Palpatine declared that this was a military concern, so he deployed the 10th Army into the Mandalore sector as a response. The Republic really could not afford to lose this area after the recent defeat in Maldruid, or the core would be almost completely defenseless on 2 sides. At the same time that the 10th was moving into position, Solust, an important manufacturing world and a vital Republic center in the southern portion of the galaxy, seceded and joined the Confederacy. The Sulustans had been concerned for a very long time with the growing militarism fueled by the Tarkin family that had taken place in the Ariadu sector before and since the Stark Hyperspace War. So they harbored some separatist sympathies. When they left, it left much of the Republic's industrial base outside of the core worlds open to attack, and it caused them to lose control of the Sluis sector. The Republic responded by heavily fortifying the remaining worlds, moving the 18th Army into a position to defend. The 18th would hold the line for months, besieged, mostly cut off, and very outnumbered. The exploits of the defenders in this region, including by members of the Tarkin family, were dramatized as Republic propaganda, and the defenders were turned into heroes. Finally, towards the end of the year, the Tarkins managed to launch a bloody and brutal counteroffensive that ground down for much of this second year of the war. The 18th Army was able to retake the Sluis sector from the Separatists, but not before suffering several key defeats, including an attempt to retake Sullust from the Confederacy. Things were not going great for the Republic when the third and final year of the war opened up between 20 and 19 BBY. The Republic's worst fears were realized when General Grievous took advantage of the 12th Army's defeat and launched an offensive that drove deep into the core. He split his fleet into two battle groups, one advancing from Yagdul and the other from Thyfera. He struck several minor targets at first before launching an all-out attack on the major Republic core world of Duro. General Grievous completely overwhelmed the defense and devastated the planet. He then proceeded to launch dozens more raids against the core worlds, all up and down the Corellian trade spine. Humbarine, Caecilius, Lodorvia, Vandos, Nadium, all of these planets suffered major CIS attacks, and this spread fear and chaos through the center of the galaxy. It's important to remember, before we continue with this offensive, that the CIS was not necessarily organized into one area. They did have sections of space that they mostly controlled, but there were a whole lot of disparate worlds in the core that also seceded from the Republic. Some of these worlds were actually pretty important, such as Fornost, which was a very ancient shipbuilding world. But because they were in the core, when the war started, they found themselves cut off and surrounded, basically bottled up and sidelined. With General Grievous now rampaging through the space around them, the defenders in this area took advantage and launched offenses of their own in an attempt to link up with Grievous's forces. The defenders at Fornost launched an attack with something known as the Bulwark Fleet, and it broke through the Republic's siege and set loose this enormous fleet to devastate core worlds. It was such an emergency that the Republic launched the Victory 1 class Star Destroyers as a response, ahead of schedule, and they sent a battle group under the joint command of Terranald Screed and Jan Dodonna, the same Dodonna from the Rebellion years later, to deal with the Fornost breakouts. The Victory Star Destroyers performed beyond all expectations, and the Bulwark fleet was finally defeated at the Battle of Anaxes. Rendili was another important starship manufacturer, and during this offensive they defected and joined the CIS. Now, this was a very big deal because Rendili again had a large fleet that they could commit to Grievous's forces. However, Plo Koon, Sassy Tin, Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Quinlan Vos, and Captain Dodonna were dispatched, and they managed to defeat Separatist forces and take back control of the Rendili fleet. These two setbacks stalled General Grievous's offensive, which had become known as Operation Dirge's Lance, and the Republic began to drive him back out of the core. They used some of the ships that they had seized from Fornost and Rendili fleets to retake Duro, and most of the rest of the core worlds were liberated. The Republic finally began to take the upper hand. Their industrial capacity started to shift the balance as both sides began to incur protracted losses as the conflict lengthened. The Republic would take advantage of General Grievous' defeat to launch a counter-offensive of their own. Now, they called this the Outer Rim Sieges, and this offensive would be a massive affair that would take part along 6 theaters of war at once: Megiddo, Serrano, Felucia, Siskin, Yagdul, and Prysedlin. Each one of these was based around a major separatist stronghold. The 19th Army pushed against Praxeum, and they were under the command of Jedi Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. They made quick, decisive gains in their sector through a combination of asymmetrical thinking and Jedi heroism. They also happened to have support from the 18th Army, which had moved in to support operations from the Sluis sector. The GIR also made quick inroads in the Serrano sector, and forces under the command of Plo Koon and Ki-Adi-Mundi managed to besiege Maigito. In fact, the Republic made good progress through fierce fighting in all sectors, and it became clear that the CIS was on its last legs as the difference in material and industrial potential became more and more evident. The heaviest fighting came in the Felucia sector, where the CIS really dug in for bear. This was the heart of their most important worlds, where basically all the industrial base that they had was, and the fighting here was incredibly fierce. The 182nd and the 501st Clone Legions were sent in, before being relieved by the 327th Star Corps under the command of Master Alis Kura later in the war. The Yagdul sector actually was taken early in the sieges, almost without a fight. The puzzled Republic military leaders wondered where all the ships had gone. It was almost like the CIS had given up the defense. Well, finally, in the last days of the war, they got their answer. General Grievous had discovered a hidden hyperspace route that allowed him to circumvent Republic defenses, and in a bold move, he launched an all-out attack against the Republic capital. Thousands of ships took part in the battle, on both sides, and General Grievous was successful in landing troops on the surface of the planet. He kidnapped the Supreme Chancellor and managed to get him back to General Grievous's flagship, the Invisible Hand. This was, however, as I'm sure you guys know, all according to Darth Sidious's plan. He was very soon rescued by Anakin and Obi-Wan, Count Dooku was slain, and the Separatist forces over the planet were destroyed. General Grievous managed to escape, but the war at this point was all but won, only cleanup actions remaining in a few Separatist strongholds in the Outer Rim. And yet, there was one more piece of the drama to unveil. Everything had gone exactly according to Darth Sidious's plan. Public sentiment, despite the Republic's recent victories in the war, had largely shifted against the Galactic government. The devastation that had been so widespread, leaving the people of the galaxy yearning for more security and peace. The Jedi were distracted, worn down, and weakened by Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious's manipulations of the dark side. It was the culmination of over 1,000 years of careful planning and maneuvering by the Sith. Palpatine leaked his true identity to the Jedi, which forced a confrontation that allowed him to corrupt Anakin Skywalker to the dark side and turn the Republic against the Jedi for good. Sidious would dispatch the newly minted Darth Vader to the Jedi Temple with the 501st Legion, and then he would send a command to his forces across the galaxy. Execute Order 66. The Clone Army, brainwashed from birth through a combination of subliminal messaging, subconscious manipulation, and propaganda, turned on their Jedi leaders, thinking them traitors to the Republic. The Jedi were almost completely exterminated in one fell swoop. Caught off guard, many of their strongest masters in dangerous theaters of war. They were scattered to the four winds, and Palpatine was able to reorganize the Republic into the First Galactic Empire. The Clone Wars officially came to an end when Darth Vader slaughtered the CIS leadership on Mustafar under orders from his master. But that was not the start of easy times for the Empire. Oh no. Next time on History of the Force, we are going to talk about imperialization and the reconquest of the Rim. I have a lot of fun with that period of Star Wars history. It's more generally known as the Rise of the Empire, but that's for next time. That's all I got for you today, guys. If you enjoyed this look at the Clone Wars, please leave a like and subscribe. This was only a very general look, and the video is already going to be like 40 minutes long. There's just too many battles with way too many details to get a closer look than this without the video ending up hours long. So if you guys want more videos on specific battles, or if you would want a huge video that's a detailed look like that from somebody that has real life military experience, just let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to do it. But for now, I'll see you next time. Stay safe out there, stay well, and may the Force break your chains.